Welcome, everybody. Hi. Welcome. How are you all doing today? Thanks for coming. Thanks for giving us your hour, your lunch break, wherever you are in your day. I'm super excited about this event. If you have come to our events before, the goal is always to make them as practical and as useful as we can. And that is why we bring in some wonderful founders that have been there and done that, because it's one of the best ways to get that tangible advice that we all need and are looking for. So thanks for joining today. As we wait for a few more people to come in, and I'll give a bit of context around the goals of today's session and what we hope that you will take away. I wanted just to ground us in this session today and think about what you might need to be present, to zoom out a little bit and, sort of allow yourself to think big about how funding and how specifically grants could help you with your business goals, could help you launch a new idea you've been thinking about, scale a project, help continue to keep a project going. If you are a consultant, think about how you can better support your clients. If you're an accelerator manager, how you can better support your founders. Just take a minute here, think about how you can do that. Do you need to close all your tabs so you don't try and do two things at once? Or do you need to sort of go get a cup of tea? Whatever it is. Let's try and actively participate today. We are here to create a conversation. So, we're going to have a Q&A, so do bring your questions. And if somebody says something that you agree with, we like to use the +1 in the chat. It's a nice way to support people who are sharing their thoughts, sharing their ideas, and sharing their experiences in sometimes a vulnerable manner. So that is how we like to create our sessions and the space. And everyone is welcome to come in whichever way you can. You can put your cameras on. You can have your lunch if you want. You can have dogs. You can have babies, whatever it is, so that you can show up today. Before I welcome in our wonderful speakers, I just want to introduce myself and Consider Capital, because for some of you, this might be the first time that you've interacted with us or you've joined one of our events. Hopefully it will not be the last time you join. But my name is Esme and I'm the founder of Consider Capital. We also have the wonderful Sam here from Consider Capital. She's giving you all a wave, and she is helping keep Zoom working behind the scenes, a difficult job. So she'll be manning the chat. So if you've got questions, if you've got thoughts, if you've got comments, she will make sure that one of us sees them. So Consider Capital, the goal is to really raise funding confidence around the world. So we know that if you are an impact-driven organization, a business, a charity, it can be really difficult and very time-consuming to work out how you might fund your business. Do you need funding? If you do, where can you get it from? What's the easiest, simplest place to find that funding? And those are the problems we are trying to solve. In terms of what do we mean by impact driven? You can be impactful in terms of the solution you are providing, but you can also be impactful in terms of how you want to build your business. You want to pay your staff fairly, you want to provide a product that's fairly priced, and some of these things can feel challenging and difficult to balance, these tensions to hold. So that is how we try and support people. That's what we do, and how we do it is we have lots of different training programs and products and services. Primarily, we have the live funding database, which I'll talk about in a minute, because we are opening up our doors next week, and our alternative funding school. Just so happens that all our panelists today actually went through our funding school, but we could talk about that at some other point. Today we're here to really talk about grants, and specifically to think about how you could use grants to effectively scale your business. So as I said, one of our key products is our live funding database. Some of our panelists use it themselves. It is a subscription service. It's about £14 a month. You can find up to 180 grants in less than 60 seconds. So a whole database of grants, accelerator programs, debt funding, and all of that good stuff. And we also help you figure out actually how do you win those types of grants. We've had so many success stories, people winning 150K from grants they found in our newsletter and our database. And we will be opening our doors next week to everybody. We already have about 150 people using it. So if you're interested, I'm just going to drop the link in the chat to join our waitlist. But for today, we're looking at grant funding. We're kind of just to dispel some of these myths around grant funding. In my experience, what I've seen working with thousands of entrepreneurs, the people don't realize how useful grants can be. They don't realize that that actually there are grants available to them at their particular stage. Now, actually, most people use grants at some point in their funding roadmap, and some people will only ever use grants until they have that sustainable revenue stream, and then they can just use their trading income. So we really want to show you the good stuff about grants, but also the bad stuff, right? Like any type of funding, there's things you need to be aware of so you don't waste your time with funding that's either not suitable for you or you're not approaching it in the most effective, efficient manner. There can be some not so brilliant grant funding bodies and foundations who ask a lot of people when they give out grants, and sometimes it can be not a good use of your time or what resources do you have. So we're going to sort of talk about grant funding with three brilliant founders. We also have someone coming in about half an hour who's got very specific experience about corporate grants, which we're excited about. We've got three wonderful entrepreneurs here that have quite different organizations and businesses. I've got different experiences with grants or using grants in different ways. So quite a diverse experience here. This will be a very UK specific event. Lots of our events are appropriate for a global audience, but because our live funding database is UK specific, this one will be more UK specific. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and we will kick off this Q&A. So what we're going to do is that I will ask a few questions at the beginning, and then I will hand over to all of you for all of your questions that you might have. I want to caveat the Q&A with, we can't answer specific questions about your funding experience, as in what your demands are. So questions like, medtech, I need funding, where do I get it from? We're unlikely to be able to help you with those questions. So keep the questions quite broad so they can help as many people as possible. All right, so I'm going to let's go to Sol first, because you're the first person I thought. I think because you're wearing red. So Sol is a absolute mega person when it comes to grants. She sent me the list of grants that she's won, and I didn't even realize it was that many, which is absolutely fantastic. So really want to hear more about your experience with grants, and maybe you can tell the audience a bit more about also your wonderful organization, what your potentially what sort of legal structure is, and then your experience with grants so far.
Yeah, thank you so much, Esme, for having me and everyone here. I joined the very first time, I think it was probably late last year, a very similar event like this, and then went on to do your course earlier this year. And it has helped enormously in our grant funding journey, really. So my name is Sol Escobar, and I am the founder of Give Your Best. And we are an award-winning social enterprise. Our legal structure is Community Interest Company Limited by Guarantee. So we're a non-profit social enterprise. And we have created the first online platform where people, brands, businesses can donate clothes very easily and online, so that communities experiencing clothing poverty can shop online for free, and sort of like a Vinted for good. And very recently, we also launched the first pay it forward physical retail store in the UK. And essentially what our retail store does is every item that is purchased in store of clothing directly funds someone in our community experiencing clothing poverty to shop in the same store but for free. So we have different ways in which we are monetizing our services, but we are purpose and impact first. And we launched, I mean, as I'm sure most of the grassroots organizations, very much as a side project of mine in the grey lockdown of 2020. Like many purpose organizations were born during that time. And nothing very much grew or happened over the first, I would say, 6 to 8 months. And then all of a sudden in 2021, it started growing, and I realized this actually could make some incredible impact. So that's when we started applying for grants. So initially it was primarily just fundraising from general public and just doing very small things. And then eventually when I realized that I wanted to go further with this, and I started doing courses in social entrepreneurship and incubators, etc., I realized, okay, well, we need to get real about applying for grants and really learn how to do. I had never applied for a grant before. My previous career has nothing to do with this. And so that's when we started. I would say that the very first large grant that we got was a corporate grant, in fact. And it was thanks to one of our volunteers who worked at this particular tech company, and that is how we found out about this particular tech grant. And that grant went on to fund our platform that turned out to be now the first platform of its kind, and that's how we were able to develop the platform that we have now. And we of course now have developed a very positive and long-term relationship with this particular corporate. But our very first successful grant was thanks to networking and thanks to asking people for help and sort of just harnessing the power of our volunteer base, because everyone works everywhere and people know people. And so that was our first step, was to ask immediate help to volunteers in our team. And after that, after doing a couple of courses within, fundraising and grant writing, we started really getting serious about applying for grants. We have in the past couple of years raised around over 200,000 in grant funding. We haven't taken any other sort of funding or investment. And we are now not entirely self-reliant. We're still relying on some grant funding, of course. We're only a couple of years old, but we are on the right track to be able to rely less on grants. So some of the bigger grants that we have managed to win are Innovate UK. That was incredibly just pivotal really for our organization, because it was a really large grant for a particular project that then went on to generate revenue. Then also National Lottery, we won that this year, and that was instrumental in us being able to open our first store as well. So that's the specific project that we applied for. We also won the eBay Circular Fashion Fund as well. And I'm kind of drawing a blank on like smaller grants that we have won, but recently as well, we just got the news a couple of days ago that we won the London grant as well for circularity. And so I think it has been incredibly really life-changing for our organization, the grants that we get. However, for the limited number of successful grants that we've had, we've probably applied to about 5 times as many. And I think if I have one piece of advice for anyone starting on this journey, is the money is out there. If you apply to enough grants, you will be successful to some of them. But at the beginning of the journey, it was so incredibly difficult to every time I got a rejection, because this was my dream, it was my baby, it was something that I believed in so much that I couldn't understand how other people didn't see it that way. And so every time that I got a rejection, I would think, well, am I not doing the right thing? And one of the best advice that I got at the beginning was, it's just numbers. You have to apply to hundreds to get a few. And so that's one of the things that I had to learn early on. I think that a rejection doesn't mean that you're not going to get it the next time. And so the first time I got rejected by Innovate UK, I was like, well, I'll take all of the incredible feedback that they gave me and do better next and apply all of that. And I applied 3 times to Innovate UK. We got the third time. So as difficult as it is, you just keep getting better and better in that journey. And also you keep getting better at taking rejection. Now, sometimes we get a rejection and I even forgot that we applied for that grant. So it's, you know, three years later, I'm just like, rejection, it just means that we're a step closer to getting the next grant. It doesn't really mean that our project is not worth funding, essentially. But it was a journey to get there, but personally for me.
Oh, amazing. See, so many nods in the room, particularly around this question of, rejection. I imagine that some of you here today have applied for many, many grants and feel a bit disheartened. I know people myself that have ended up walking away from their businesses because they've had several rejections and have taken it very personally. I'd love to hear, Sol, if you're happy to share sort of how you managed to build up this like resilience.
Well, I think the resilience, kind of like in line with what I was saying before, it has 2 sides. One is organizational resilience and financial resilience, and the other one is personal resilience as a founder, sorry. I don't know if everyone here is a founder, but I think you do really, really need to build both. On the one hand, personal resilience as a founder to keep going and going and going. For me, what's helped the most is building a community of other founders so that you don't feel like you're the only one going through this journey. And even being in this program and hearing the journey of other founders and also hearing from people that are a little bit ahead in that journey made me realize, well, actually, I am on the right path and everyone goes through this. And I think doing that and seeking mentoring and being part of incubators and accelerators, those things are things that I had never done before. And I think it does give you that sense of community that you're not alone. And whenever you need something, you can ask someone who's been through that process. And for me, particularly, that has been very helpful in building my own resilience. And when my resilience is better, then my team's is as well, because whether we like it or not, I think as founders, we are the driving force of our organization and we are the cheerleaders for our impact and for our team. And I think we need to be able to have that trust in ourselves that we can keep going before we can inspire our team to keep going during those tough times. So that's on the one hand, the more personal side of resilience, I think. And organizational and financial, that is something that I absolutely had to learn in a more traditional way because I didn't have any background. And so I actually had to do courses on financial planning and resilience and surround myself with volunteers and pro bono help from people that know more than me in this area. I think being a founder is a very humbling journey as well because you realize so much you don't know, as much passion and belief and hope you can have. There's a lot of things that I didn't know in a more technical way and that I had to learn through courses or mentoring, etc. So I think preparing yourself with the tools for the financial resilience and organizational planning is important. And on the other hand, building your network to build a more personal resilience, I guess.
Oh, thank you. And there's some really nice messages in the chat from people saying brilliant advice. People also struggling with this, trying to figure out how they can get, a thicker skin and handle this level of rejection and not take it personally. So thank you. And if you've got
And
questions for
yeah,
us,
one last thing that I would say is that I don't want people to think that I'm there. I mean, I've been doing this for 3 years now. I'm still building it. I'm still building both the financial resilience of the organization and also my personal one. You know, sometimes a few months ago, we didn't know if we were going to be able to pay salaries and rent. And that is because sometimes the grant landscape is very, you know, just you just don't know what's going to happen. It's very, very unstable, and that is very difficult for a founder to deal with, that uncertainty, I find. And so I think it's such a long journey that I've given up the idea of, oh, I'm trying to reach a level where I'm there and I know what I'm doing and we have it all figured out. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, because when we get to a point where we know what we're doing and we're a little bit safe and we know, then we have a new project that just throws everything up in the air. And so I think that's just a constant journey for founders to be there. So I'm also still learning. I can tell you what I've learned over the past 3 years, but I'm like, the journey ahead is still, yeah, still long.
absolutely, we are constantly always learning. So yeah, if you've got more specific questions for Sol, do put them in the chat. And we'll create a bit of time for Q&A in a minute. And I've put Sol's website in the chat, so do check it out and see if there are ways that you can support her brilliant organization. I think we will hand over to Colette now, because she's also wearing red and it seems to be a fun theme. Jane and I missed out on the memo in our dark colours. Yeah, Colette, who runs a really brilliant agency, and I'm sure you can speak a little bit about what you do as well, because I'm sure there are some people in this room that could also benefit from your services. But if you want to speak a bit to your experiences around looking for grants, thinking about grants, and then sort of making those applications, as somebody that is more, maybe a bit more earlier in their journey than Sol, if that's fair to say.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Esme. And I am going to give another endorsement of both newsletter, funding database, and fundraising course, because I'm doing all of them. So I'm Colette. I run a brand and strategy consultancy called Brand by Me. We are in fact, anti-racist brand consultancy, because I think we're the only one currently, although we'd love it if there were more. And so what that means is we do a couple of things. We work with organizations that are really serious about social justice and help them build better brands by embedding anti-racism and equity into the heart of their brands. And we also work with brands to help people navigate and understand how to tackle inequity and injustice through the power of brand. So, and that involves kind of training and learning, but specifically for brand and comms teams. I've been a founder for 8 years, and Brand by Me has been going for 8 years. So we're not new to business. What we are incredibly new to is funding and grant funding, funding of any kind, actually. And so the reason I think the first stage of my journey was actually signing up to Esme's newsletter, which I think was recommended to me by another founder, because the thing that I guess the problem we were struggling with is that we have a really brilliant, in my words, but not only in my words, we win a lot of awards. We have a brilliant consultancy business, because what we do is very specific, and it's quite unique. And so we have great long-term relationships with the brands that we work with, and we've built quite a high-value consultancy business. But the impact and reach is limited because, as I said, we work with brands that are serious about social justice, and people, although in my personal opinion, I think that should be all brands, people think that that is niche. And people think that, okay, that must mean just charities or something. And so inevitably, it does mean we work with very specific types of organization on the consultancy side. And over the last maybe kind of 2 or 3 years, I've seen in the public domain a much greater need for what we do, but an inability to service those clients, not necessarily without, and I guess service those clients without kind of scaling and growing to a massive agency, which I don't want to do. I think that would cause us to maybe be part of the problems that we want to solve. So I was really thinking about how we can scale our reach and impact without scaling the business, and that involves us developing products, a more product-led approach, not instead of consultancy, but alongside of it. So taking what we learn into training and learning products, and that obviously needs money. And of course, today, 8 years in, I've always bootstrapped the business, which means what I've done is when we've got revenue from consultancy and stuff like that, I've put it back into the business, quite a lot of it, in order to grow and develop the stuff we need. But there are two things. One is that innovation comes at a risk, and that means if we're doing that consistently, it's starting to get a stage where I'm kind of putting the business at risk and affecting that kind of financial resilience that Sol talked about. But also, we are limited in terms of the scope of, I guess, our ambition by what we're already doing. And I guess the third thing, of course, is as the founder, like, we have a team, there's 10 of us. And so I do work in the business because I set up my business because I love brands and I love brand strategy and I really love anti-racism work. I like doing that work. And if I'm doing that work for clients, I don't have the time to innovate and build stuff. And that was kind of the challenge, really. So we weren't able to do anything. And so someone recommended Esme's newsletter, and that's where I saw the first grant that we applied for, which was Innovate UK's Creative Catalyst grant, a grant that we won. So I won't say.
Oh my God, I didn't even know that, Colette.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. I was like, wait a minute, because somebody then recommended we apply for it, but I'd already seen it via the newsletter. And one of the challenges, and this is
the same one we won as well.
Yeah. Oh! And I completely agree, because I think me and Sol are on the same.
We talked about this.
We did. We were like, because Sol had already applied for quite a few grants at that point. You were like, I'm applying for that too. And we were like, oh my gosh, yes. And so, yeah. And that was the first grant we'd applied for. And but everything that Sol says is true. It is a number game. I think I was working out the 1 in 5 thing is totally true, because so far we've applied for 5 and got 1, and I think that is looking like it's going to be the case as well. So I can totally endorse that, even at the start of the journey. The other thing, I guess, I would say is that in terms of that resilience piece, yeah, the rejection piece is real. It's something, running a consultancy business, we got really used to, because particularly in the sphere of anti-racism, because people are like, we get quite a lot of energy around people loving the sound of what we do and being very excited about it. And then when it comes to like parting with the money, it's like, oh no, sorry, oh no. And that can feel very difficult. So what we found, and what I've personally found as a founder, is that decoupling the process from the outcome is really useful in terms of rejection. So what I will say is these process of doing proposals or grant applications is really, really cool for helping you articulate your business, benefit of it, scale of it, the issue. And that's something that's really useful anyway. And I found that the skills of writing grant applications are the same ones you need for applying for awards, are the same ones you need for sort of writing proposals. It all comes from the same place. So what you end up with is a bank of language that makes you quite good at positioning and selling your business, which is always useful. So I found if I see it as that kind of learning process, like so, I sort of then forget when I've applied for things. I'm like, and when it comes back, you're like, oh yeah, great, okay. But it's not so much, oh no, when they say no, you're like, okay, fine, whatever. I'm still going to go on and do my business. It's kind of fine. And I know that sounds flippant. It's taken me a long time to get there, because before, the natural thing is, oh, my business is failing, that no one gets the idea or whatever. And actually, the ability to kind of see it as the process, as a learning process and giving you good skills. And therefore, it's a bit like job applications. Like job applications, I found that once I started seeing it as actually, it's just a really good thing to apply for this. I'm just going to apply for it as just to kind of see where I am in the market. I then stopped 8 years ago, whenever I was back in that employee mindset. I stopped being worried about whether I got the job. And I was thinking, okay, well, that's also not going to be right for me. And it's kind of the same thing for business. Sometimes with Brand by Me, where we don't get things, I'm like, actually, that was good because it wasn't the right thing for us, or it wasn't the right time for us. So I'll give you an example. We applied for the women, is it called Women in Innovation? I think that's right, for Innovate. Didn't get it because the feedback was really good in terms of our idea and what we had. But they were like, you probably need to develop the products that you've got already first before you start applying for this next phase grant. And they were right. And in fact, after I'd applied, I was a bit panicked. I spoke to April, my ops lead, who's on the call here. And I was like, what if what we're developing now doesn't work and I've already applied for funding for phase 2? If we got it, I would have been petrified. So actually they were right. It wasn't the right time at all. And sometimes you need someone to tell you that. So I think seeing it all as a learning process is a really good way to go.
I applied for that too and didn't get it either. So, there's still so many rejections that we get.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think because that was one where they had a lot of applicants. And actually, to be fair, there was a whole lot of controversy about it. But what I would say is, to be fair, I think that the feedback we got was so useful because one, it validated the idea. So we're looking to build a number of products next year, and it validated both the need and the market for it as right, and that was gold. But also some of the feedback has helped us then in thinking about strategically what other grants we can apply for. I've been talking quite a while, so the other thing I'm going to say is the final thing I'm going to say is although it's a numbers game, equally try and match the grants very closely to kind of what you're looking to do or the problem you're looking to solve. So you heard Sol say quite a lot that it is about searching to have success with kind of grants that focus around circular kind of economy and circular fashion and fashion waste and that sort of thing. I think being very specific. So we, Innovate UK Creative Catalyst, is specifically a grant for creative industries. And so that meant when we're in creative industries and businesses that are looking to use innovation to scale. So that it meant that from the get-go, we knew that actually we were the right people for that grant, as opposed to maybe some of the other grants where I've tried and then thought actually they're very generic. It's not. Also, this time I've been looking for someone that's looking to solve kind of when I'm looking at grants now, I'm looking for ones that are about inequity and injustice and solutions that solve that at scale. And that sort of thing. So that strategic approach and making sure that you're really clear and there's a match there in terms of, who the grant is looking to fund is really key. And I know it sounds super obvious, but I've heard quite a lot of people, for example, with Creative Catalyst now, people said, I applied for that and didn't get it. And then when we've had the conversation, I was like, actually, some weren't even in the creative industries, or some people, if you're having to make a creative case for why you are in scope of that grant, I might argue that you probably want to spend your energies focusing on one where you're definitely, you can tick the box immediately, yes, we're in scope, rather than trying to create a kind of argument for why you are, and that will save you some time. And I think that's all I'm going to say, but I would say do it. That's the other final thing, is do it. Grant funding, because the other thing is also keep Google Docs with the answers that you've given for grants, and then address it as the feedback you've got, because then you have this library and then you can just kind of copy and paste into and adjust the answers. It makes it much easier if you've got that, when you've applied for it, just keep that language there.
Absolutely. That's a great tip. Store all this information. All right, we have a special guest who is Isabel, and then we will hand over to Jane, who has been waiting patiently. So Isabel, we got her for 5 or 10 minutes, but there were a few questions specifically about corporate grants as well, and so Isabel can also speak to that. She has won all sorts of different types of grant funding. So Isabel, please share a little bit about your sort of what you are doing right now, your organization, and who you're also supporting, and then it would be lovely to hear the experiences around sort of corporate grants and finding the grants out of like a big pool of opportunities. That would be amazing.
Perfect. Thanks so much for having me. So, hi, I'm Izzy. I am the director of a microfinance fund called Skylight Ventures that's grown out of my work in the refugee sector. So, essentially, I offer interest-free microloans to refugees who are starting businesses. And I've been running this project now for about 2.5, 3 years. It initially grew out of a pilot that was through grant funding with Ben and Jerry's. So, I started out in a really cozy environment with this pot of money, with my salary paid through my other job at a social enterprise called Turn, which some of you might know. And then beyond the pilot phase, I had to figure out how to access grant funding for my two main cost areas. So one of them is lending capital. So I have to finance all the loans that I'm giving out to refugee businesses. And then on top of that, I need to cover my overheads and my operational costs, which have been super lean in the last few years. But my challenges in the last 12 months have been around scaling efficiently because, as I said, I don't charge interest on my loans. So my business model is pretty much fully non-profit. Something that I'm also looking at changing potentially as the loan sizes grow in future and I lend to more registered companies. But for now, I've been mainly having to focus on accessing grant funding through trusts and foundations and then corporate partners and corporate foundations. I also applied for the Women Innovation Award. I was not a good fit. So it was really interesting to hear Colette talk about her grant experience with Innovate UK, because that was a classic example I'll come on to talk about of me not doing my proper due diligence and getting really excited ahead of applying for something and actually trying to fit myself to a grant that wasn't made for me. And I would say that my best experiences over the last couple of years have come through strong relationship building. So I'll speak to the corporate piece first. Some of my funding comes from foundations attached to eBay and the Whole Food Markets sort of organic group. And they've both given me quite big chunks of funding, largely for lending capital. And the Whole Foods relationship was actually built over 2.5 years. So they got in touch with Turn back in 2018. And I started talking to them about my interest in financial inclusion and poverty alleviation. And they became sort of a warm contact over years. And I was really lucky that the same person stayed there. But at the time, I never thought I would get money from them in the future. And then it came back a couple of years later that they were looking for a UK-based partner. I was so early stage, but they actually gave me 150,000 US dollars over 3 years as a sort of quite speculative lending capital grant. And they were my first relationship that enabled me to think about how the funder sees me. And what I need to show them, because the whole time I had severe imposter syndrome. I thought they're going to see through this pilot. They're going to know that I don't have a background in finance and I have to show these figures and pretend to understand them. But really what underpinned the strength of our relationship was that trust in the organization they'd built up over the last couple of years, which I'd solidified by doing things that seemed to me like soft relationship enhancers. So inviting them to events, having employees come and mentor entrepreneurs that I work with, keeping them in touch like with a newsletter. All of that felt so simple to me because it's just relationship building. But they've since told me that that's what like helped build the trust for them to deliver what was to me a really significant amount of money. And then other corporate partners that I've worked with, it's largely been kind of through collaborating with other organizations. So Turn, the other organization I work at, has really strong partners in the business sector, especially around like sustainable business and ethical business. And through associating myself with their work, I've been able to get into the right rooms to speak to people at eBay, Ben and Jerry's, for example. And my development with those individual contacts has also been really important. So since I've been out more on my own in the last 12 months, I've been trying to apply that approach to grant funding with varied success, because there's a huge pool of things out there. And I think I came in just as Colette was talking about finding the right specific opportunities for yourself. And the approach I take, and has been working quite well for me in the last 6 months, is like this funnel of starting out with really sort of cold research and cold outreach. So I go into platforms like 360 grant giving, like 360 giving is where I tend to start. And in there, I search for keywords and I see like my keywords are refugee, financial inclusion, poverty alleviation. And I see who's been giving out funding. So it will show you who has funded who in those areas in the last couple of years. It is a slog. There's so much data in there. Like you'll get like 2,000 pages of results or something, but they tend to start with the most relevant. So I started off by going through those first few pages and picking out a few organizations I saw coming up again and again. For example, I found my most recent contact, which is the Rain Foundation, through doing that. And then kind of slimmed that down to, once I've opened like 50 websites, the people whose keywords actually translate into relatable projects for me. And that can be quite easy. You're looking at whether they've got open calls for funding or whether they're invite only, whether they are giving out amounts that are sustainable for me. So at the moment, I'm looking for anything sort of over £15,000, which can be both big or small, depending on where you're at in your development journey. And then at that point, I move them into my fundraising pipeline sort of document, which is the most important thing I've created for myself. And it saves my sanity like again and again. So I'm really happy to share a draft for this if anyone ever wants it. It's like a basic spreadsheet, and I use it to calculate the likelihood of a grant coming through. And that tells me whether or not I should go for it, because I feel like I should be applying for everything all of the time, essentially. And I feel guilty if I see a grant come up that's vaguely relevant and I'm not putting in an application for it. But one of the best lessons a colleague has taught me is to use this kind of calculator of likelihood. And for me, it's based on what they say on their website. So some funders are quite transparent about how many things they funded and what their percentage of success like is. And then others are not. So I calculate it based on, do I have a contact there? Have they funded refugee specific projects? Am I of the right size? And I guess basically, but I tend to try and guess on the conservative side. So a lot of the time I'm looking at bids where I'm saying like, I've got a 10 to 20% chance of getting this. And then if they're offering like £20,000, I know roughly what that bid is worth to me. So I would much rather go for a 15K bid where I've got a 90% chance of success in my mind, because they've pretty much verbally invited me to apply and like I know somebody there and it's a really good fit, rather than like the Women Innovation Award. I applied for 60K and it was like in my mind like a less than 5% success rate. So if you work out what that actually means financially, I was applying for much less than I thought I was. And that is just a really easy matrix that helps me make decisions about not being overwhelmed on what to apply for, like what not to apply for, which is just as important, I think, as what you do apply for. Wow, 1.2%, that's crazy. I wish I'd known that. So yeah, I use that matrix to make decisions. And then from that point onwards, if I've listed any invite-only funders, grant funders in that list, I then do a LinkedIn scour. That's my next stage. So I'll go on there, look for the foundation, try and find anybody who is or has been in a decision-making position for that organization. Who have I got in common with them? Actually, sometimes it's been Esme. And then I try and like find some way of getting to them, essentially. Sometimes like a cold LinkedIn outreach is fine, or I ask around my team, anybody who might have worked there before, or in networks like this, really good for that, for those connections. And then I try and get hold of that person and get a call in. I'm also not aware of how much time I have, but I will just give one more tip if I've got time. And that was a really useful feedback I had from a mentor who was in a sales role at a corporate, who talked to me about my approach to fundraising, because I was very much thinking about it as like, why can I demonstrate that I deserve money from you? Like that this is, because I'm really good at surfacing impact. We have really strong like impact, and it's kind of undeniable. But storytelling in a way that communicates that, and also in a way which demonstrates the benefit for the corporate, is really important. So there are two things that I did with him. And the first one was develop a pitch deck that for me felt more like pitching like a for-profit business, which was quite alien to me. But it's like a really simple 10-slide deck. And I based it on, it's available somewhere on the internet. It's called like the best pitch deck in the world or something. It's a resource somewhere that I will try and find. And I tried to base my argument around like that structure. And it'll be for anyone who's pitched an actual business, like it's very familiar. It's like problem, solution, but I wasn't thinking about things that way. And I kept it really concise, and I tried to keep some good storytelling in there that differentiates us as like how our impact actually works. And then once I kind of worked on that, that is a really great intro to what I do. And I send that out to anybody I get an introduction to just with the first email, like that LinkedIn contact I've got, I'll pass on that pitch deck. And they need to be able to read that and know who I am, what the story is, and what my ask is as well. And asks was the thing we were talking about with Esme actually yesterday in our last session of the Alternative Funding School. And it's something that's scary as a nonprofit, because you feel like you should be offering rather than asking sometimes. But the second thing the sales guy taught me was really clearly define in the last slide of that deck the benefits you can offer them. And even tier it as like a proposition. You can say like, if you give me 25K, I will be able to offer you like X number of volunteering days with my organization, and this is what it will look like. We can co-brand this site or like this storytelling site. We can produce content together. We can put on an event. You could co-sponsor the event, and we can invite like your like national employees to all come. These are all various things that have worked for me, but it's about finding what that corporate needs from you. And then, because we can pretty much do anything, we're very flexible. That's, we've bootstrapped a lot in this sector. So I think embrace that and figure out what they want and how you can provide it, and know your value as well. Yeah, I've talked pretty much nonstop there for 10 minutes. If there's anything else you want me to touch on, let me know. But I will go into the chat as well and look at the questions too.
No, that's absolutely brilliant. So much useful tips. Even our speakers are writing notes. I can see them. I'm writing notes myself. It's excellent and really good to hear. Like, I'm a big fan of frameworks, so wonderful to hear this sort of matrix you developed around. Is this, not just looking at your gut, looking at the data and be like, is this a good move for me or not? It's a
Can
fantastic.
I just add something to that? And Isabel, I'm so glad to see you here because we've talked a lot along the years, because we also support primarily refugees as well and have worked with Chen before, etc. But I also wanted to add, I think it's fantastic the framework that you've developed to see likelihood, etc. We do something very similar, but probably not in such a proper way as you do it. So I would love to see your system. But another thing that I wanted to add as well is that for us, something that has really helped is that for a very young nonprofit organization, a lot of the time funders or corporates, etc., might look at you and think, are you legit? Where did you come from? Who are you? Right? So one thing that we focused on the first couple of years was actually applying for awards, and they don't have any financial return, but we have found that after winning a few awards and saying we have been recognized by quite high level award organizations, that we had applications refused that then we applied with pretty much the same one, but adding the awards that we had won, and we did get it. And so sometimes just to add that legitimacy, I think both awards and for us as well, having some sort of media recognition. So we were in The Guardian, we were in Vogue, we had a few awards. And after a couple of years of kind of like working at building that sort of brand recognition and organization recognition, we have found that that really helped our case as well. And that really depends as well in which area you are. So for example, we sit at a very interesting intersection of different issues that we address. So we apply for awards and grants that have to do with fashion circularity, but in sustainability, but also human rights. We have a lot of funders that support refugees because 95% of the community that we support are refugees. And then also tech for good, because our platform is very much tech for good. Now we have started in retail for good, so we had some grants for that as well. So it's kind of like, check also which grants apply to what you're doing, and in the way that Isabel was saying, like very much check the likelihood of you getting it, but don't forget that there are areas of what you do that might have very specific grants that might apply to one of the issues that you address as well. And awards as well would be to apply for one or two that you have high likelihood of getting. That has been very useful for us as well.
Excellent advice. Awards are a good way just to sort of like dip your toes in. I want to give the floor to Jane now, because I don't know how we managed to get to 50 minutes. And Jane has been sitting here ever so patiently with
That's
so
okay.
much tips and advice to share. So thank you for being here. Yeah, so I want to highlight Jane. She participates in one of our very early cohorts and has a really interesting experience with the grants, because her grant that she was saying just before the school really changed everything for her, really was incredible in terms of allowing her to build her first MVP. So maybe Jane, you want to speak a little bit about you and your fantastic business. I'll put a link in the chat and what your sort of experience has been around grant funding.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that's been said already. I'm just nodding along to all of it because I think it's interesting how much it resonates, all the different things that have been spoken about so far. So I won't repeat any of that, but I definitely agree. And so myself and my business partner run a company called Home Notes. We're both architects, so we've been working in the industry for a long time. Then we switched to being more kind of client support for people doing renovations. So trying to reach a lot more people than we were able to help as individual projects. So we made a platform where we do courses on how to renovate, how to manage your budget, how to hire your team. So just lots of information that we felt like people didn't have and were struggling with. So So we're a for-profit business, and we kind of felt like we were growing in the kind of prop tech industry a little bit. And I was reaching out, we were meeting lots of other founders who had funding, and I just couldn't understand it and didn't really understand what was going on and what it all meant. So I joined the Alternative Funding School in 2022. I just looked up, basically just to get just that language and understanding about what even is out there, what's possible. At that time, I think that we were only looking at VC funds. It hadn't occurred to me to go for a grant at all. I thought, because we're a for-profit business, and we didn't, I think the thing that I've learned is that never would have described us as mission driven, but actually everything we do is not really for profit. It's about solving the issues that we come across in our industry. And I very much kind of suddenly realized, like, actually we are mission driven. We have very strong principles about the problem we're trying to solve and the impact that can have on the industry. And just kind of really thinking about what we're doing in a much more high level way, and being, zooming out a little bit, because I was so intent on solving the problems of the people that we were dealing with, that I forgot to look at the bigger picture. If people renovate their homes better, they're more sustainable. You're saving people's budgets, you're getting better accommodation for people. There's so many other impacts on doing this job well. And every renovation that happens that doesn't meet that criteria is a lost opportunity, because we all need to be moving towards this kind of more sustainable living environment. So I think the grant funding, as others have said, like literally the process of writing the answers to the questions in that framework just made me realize, like, oh wow, like, no, we are doing all this stuff, and I should really focus on that and explain that as like the wider kind of impact that we're going to be having if we solve these immediate needs of our group and our community. And we went for the Women Innovation Grant Funds, like straight after, in 2022, after the alternative funding. And I found that really hard to write, and very hard to kind of shoehorn somehow my business into how I was a woman and how it was going to help my business. I just thought all the questions were written very hard. It took me ages, absolutely ages, to put that grant application together, and it didn't make any sense to me, really. I just felt like I was repeating the same things in all the questions. And then we didn't get that, got good feedback, which was basically that somebody in my industry had read our application and not understood what we were trying to do at all, which was really like, wow, you've totally fundamentally misunderstood what we're trying to do. And so I was like, right, we've not explained that very well. Went for the Creative Catalyst Fund, which we just got. So we're the 2024 group. I wonder if you're the same. Okay. So when I was answering those questions, I was like, okay, this makes sense. I can answer these questions. It feels easy. I felt like it was an easier process. And I guess that's just the alignment that everybody's talking about, that you're not trying to push a square peg in a round hole. You're like, the answers are flowing here. And obviously we used everything that we'd done before. But I think in terms of that grant, I think maybe what helped us, ChatGPT wasn't around when I did my first grant application. I'm dyslexic. I find it quite hard to organize my thoughts. So just pooling everything into ChatGPT about our business, our mission, what we were doing, and then helping it to make structured answers that fit the word count. I think fitting the word count is probably one of the hardest things. But the most important part of that is then I gave it to my business partner, Amy, who hadn't kind of read any of this, and it was all very dry and technical. And she's like, you're answering the question really well, but it just is leaving me dead. Like, I don't care whether you've like met A, B, and C in your answer. And so she really just helped come at it with a more personal view, and like took things apart and was just like, what are you trying to say here? And like really making it more conversational. So I think our killer line was that the renovation industry is the Wild West. That's how we like set out our starting line. And you've got to kind of grab them with something that makes sense, not from a funding, not from a kind of, you know, practical sense, which was where I was at, but from a really like, what is the problem? And it is, you know, you're sending out people into this industry which is not, doesn't feel safe at all. And so I think that's maybe what helped us. I think we were based in London. I had moved to Sheffield, so I moved our office to Sheffield because I knew that they had a portfolio approach. So I think that that was another tick in the box for us. And also that application also asked us, did we have an advisory board? And I was just, at first I was like, no, we don't have an advisory board. We're too small for that. And then I suddenly realized, like, no, like, again, like, think of that bigger picture. We had made all these industry connections with people that were really like, we'd spoken to over the years, that were really gunning for us and were like available for us to chat to. So people in other tech startups, people in other businesses that we'd met. And I just reached out to them and said, you know what, could I put you as my list of, could you be an advisor for me? You know, and they were like, and what's the commitment? And I was like, I don't know what the commitment is right now, you know, let's come to that when we get there. You know, maybe there's some grant funding that we could give you, or maybe it's just that I'm telling the people that we are applying for that we have people who know us and want us to succeed. And I think I hadn't really considered that before, but from their perspective, you're trying to make sure that you're showing them that you have a support network that means that you can succeed in what you're doing and you have people to call on. So I think it's using all the terminology that sounds quite scary and actually just looking at yourself and thinking, go on, maybe I do have that. Maybe there is stuff that I can put in that answer. And I felt like the Creative Catalyst questions really drew out that information in a way that other grants hadn't. So I think look at what you've got and try and work out how you could reframe that in a way that makes sense to them. And it's not bigging yourself up or kind of lying, you're actually just things that you haven't really perceived as support or kind of indicators that you're doing well, which again is like the awards and, you know, your network and your community. You know, we have a lot of people in our user base. And again, I think that's something that maybe is helpful to show that you've got building that kind of network of people that you're helping that are potential customers and users at the end of the day and communicating that.
Thank you so much, Jane. Thank you. Lots of really great tips, and really just to, you know, not feel scared of some of the jargon and the language, or you don't have enough. Actually, we have more than we think in many circumstances, or we can really easily go and get it like an advisory board. I'm sure there are people that are already in your corner supporting you that just want to be asked. And they'll definitely say yes. So thanks for highlighting that. I think that's all we've got time for. We're actually 1 minute over. But everyone, please thank our wonderful panelists today who have given up their lunch hour to pay it forward and share their experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to grant funding. Thank you all, and thank you for those of you that are also in the chat answering questions, asking questions. Thank you so much. If you want to be part of this community, then join our live funding database next week. Have a good rest of the week, and I will see you somewhere else on the internet. Thank you so much, everyone.